Okay, maybe I got it straight right now. So it's 5 o'clock, 5 a.m. in the morning, like that and everything. I thought I'd get you guys kind of all set here and everything for the final. Reason why I'm doing this is because you guys have biology, you're doing a lot of stuff, and I think you're really prepared for my midterm, and I'm going to explain that in a way, all right, why you're really prepared for it already. So, um, one thing is that the main thing is that I want to tell you guys are doing great. You've been studying hard all semester. I don't think you have any problems, for the midterm. You've been working hard for this. Here's my biggest hint for you is this. Make sure you read the 3 chapters in here that I asked you to read and do the index card. Get a 3x5 card. You're not allowed for the old 4x6. That's not allowed. And make sure you do that because that you really know the areas that we're talking about, that I'm going to kind of review a little bit for the midterm. We did this already. We did the part that you're probably unfamiliar with, the Civil War part, the before the Civil War part, the antebellum United States. So you're not familiar with that as much, and we went over that on Monday and Tuesday. So probably what you're, strongest on is the Gilded Age. It's recent, you know, and we just really did the progressive era in a way. So you're kind of already on that. What you're probably you need to get your 50% on here is the 3 chapters on trust, unions, and newspapers here. 17, 18, and 19. I'm going to say it again. Listen, because you're probably not looking at my fat face, but do this today. Get your 3x5 card if you haven't already done it. Take good notes thinking about maybe what's important, what I would like to emphasize and kind of reinforce. Because think about this, especially the 2 chapters on the trust and unions. You need to get the answers from here, not the answers that we kind of studied in class, because that's what you're going to be, what I'm expecting you to have the answer that you've read this. You got to prove to me that you read Americana in those 3 chapters. So take your time today, go through those 3 chapters in there, and really the ones on unions and trusts. All right. Now, he's like, Mr. Price, do we have any questions on papers, like again, everything? That means I can just skip that. No, no. I'm saying is that that's going to be where more of the questions that you need to answer from on there. And knowing that the 25 multiple choice questions will not be so concentrated on unions and trust. There probably will be very if any questions on there when you're going through the 4 or 5 questions on the Gilded Age. All right. So there's enough more going on during the Gilded Age that you not have to worry about um, thinking about the trust and unions. All right. But don't worry, that overarching theme will be there for sure. All right. So I'm going to say it again, ad nauseum, ad infinitum. That's what you need to do the most. If you haven't did it already, is read and what some of you do. I read the 3 chapters. I took notes. I should be ready. Well, did you remember anything? Because everything that you write down on your card, you cannot be solely dependent upon it. Did you understand it? You're wasting your time if you do. Then what you do, you take maybe 2 or 3 minutes or maybe a few minutes just think in your head, okay, what are the sections that's going to be on the midterm multiple choice? And maybe look at a Google Doc, maybe. But you definitely get some rest this evening. Maybe you go play a video game. Maybe you do something else. Maybe you watch something else. And I'm actually recommending that. Don't saturate yourself about studying and studying and studying this evening if you get this done first, because you should be ready for the rest of the sections that I'm going to just talk about, some of the topics that you're familiar with. All right. So if you get this done, you should be more than prepared for your midterm, because the rest of the midterm is this. All right. The Gilded Age. Okay. So, and you know a lot about that. Going to, talk about the other parts that's maybe not included in this. and the progressive era. And we just did that with Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson. So there's no need. All right. So get some rest. Get some rest after you make sure your card is filled up and you've read the chapters and maybe you've reread the three chapters so you prepare for part one when I give you the first section out. All right. That's what you need to do. Don't because the easy part is really, I think the multiple choice questions. I know people say, yeah, it's easy for you, Mr. Price. There's always tricky ones. Well, you know what? Uh, sorry that, thinking that, like, oh, well, I'm going to get all 25 correct. Getting 20 correct out of 25 and getting all the Americana questions, that's either a B or low A or something. I don't know what's wrong with that. And plus you have your sanity, and plus you have your rest, and you're not stressed. Enjoy yourself and enjoy life. All right. So don't worry about all the time about like A, and you tell your parents that. Say I said that. It's all about the learning, and you guys have been learning a lot, like I said, in this time. Okay. So one good question. Um, you know, um, that's very important this first 5 minutes. So hopefully you play that over and over and hear it again because I keep on concentrating on that. But I know some you guys won't listen like that. You'll put two things down on your like index card and you go like, oh yeah, but I just want to study the stuff that I know already and I'm comfortable with. That's what you want to do. And I know you guys just don't want to challenge yourself and everything. And again, just the apprehension of just like going here and just finding some quiet time and reading and rereading and actually learning some things. So that's what all I'm trying to do is twist your arm. All right, let's get to the parts that you basically already know. Now, somebody asked about what's in the Gilded Age too. Is that well? There's the West too. Major parts from the West that you think about. I'm not worried about what happened in the Fetterman massacre. Things in the West that you can point out here is maybe main things here. The Battle of Little Big Horn, if you want to call it like maybe the loss at the Little Big Horn in there. Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse there. So again, the Lakota Indians. And really the kind of the end of the Indian Wars here with Wounded Knee in 1890 and what happened of that tragedy there. Really the massacre, why somebody was trying to do the ghost dance. And other main parts is this kind of like this debate about what do we do with the Native Americans? What should we put on a reservation, assimilation, Carlisle Indian schools, Dahl Severity Act, all right, in 1887, all right, says Mr. Dawes, Charles Dawes, he says that, hey, we need to do something for the Indian survival, take them off, 160 acres farming, and kind of results of that. Then you get Helen Hunt Jackson, who's really trying to be the voice of reason and kind of counterpoint and fact that like talking about Native Americans are not savages. If anything, it is what we've done that has been very savage to them. All right. And close it out with really that bridges the gap between the Indian Wars and the settlement out west, really with the Gilded Age and with American expansionism and American imperialism is the frontier thesis by Frederick Jackson Turner. What he said at the Chicago's World Fair in 1893, that the frontier basically is closed, and then that leads really to imperialism. You go like, I always like going back and forth and going ahead. Imperialism, motivations there. You need markets. You need natural resources. You need people to buy the things that we're making. We want to make sure too that we want to compete with power. Like again, like New England, we want to be kind of this world power. We're worried about where people are going to settle, so we want that kind of like prestige and like that. And we also want to like be the managers of the world, the social Darwinism, the kind of white man's burden kind of argument for imperialism. So there you go. Somewhat the West. Don't worry too much about the good loving trail and barbed wire. Just count that and everything. Just about that. Other parts there, like I said, the Gilded Age, besides the unions and the trust, there is the whole big thing about comparing that this is the second industrial revolution. This is unlike the first industrial revolution where you got like the four C's there. You got coal, you got cotton, You got communication there, and you have canals, the four C's. And you compare it to this industrial revolution. It's all about railroads, roads, right? Oil, right? Steel, and eventually electricity. But really, the railroads, transportation, factories, corporations, large inputs, and large available capital, money and goods and machinery to make something, to produce something, and to sell something, to compete with the Western European, industry, and to outdo them by the turn of the 20th century, like steel. And I say it's a great example that basically we weren't producing hardly any steel, like really before the Civil War. And then all of a sudden we become the like leading steel exporter by the early 20th century. You have to know the big picture of the Gilded Age in here. The kind of time of the Gilded Age, when I'm talking about Second Industrial Revolution, this is not like a finite time around like, from 1865 to 1900. I heard somebody yesterday said basically Teddy Roosevelt ended the Gilded Age. I think I love that. I think that sums up the whole thing right there because it took a strong president to kind of put a kind of not stopping expansion, not stopping industrialization, but maybe just taking the reins and pulling it back and said, slow down. And that's what Teddy Roosevelt did. So, what else in the Gilded Age besides like the expansion in the West and there? Well, you got the Grand Administration, and you want to think about like, how did this administration go? Again, according to the lost cause, according to people that like, because Grant is the, big Civil War hero for the Union. He's kind of denigrated in early history by the lost cause. And speaking of that, just want to make sure that looking at that article here that you guys do read about the lost cause. I mean, that's very important. I sent that out for you. So if anything that you do, I'm trying to find my copy here, is make sure it's like, again, getting the Civil War right. That's what it's called. I know I have it right here, but don't worry about it. But that's what you need to read too, because I'll take a question about that and it makes you understand my theme about the interpretation of history. What is the sourcing of history, and why do so many people think about like the Civil War and get it so wrong? It's because it's people's interpretation in what the lost cause. Anyway, getting back to Grant, Grant's like, you got the scandals there. You don't need to know all of them. You don't need to know the Belknap, Whiskey Ring, Credit Mobier. Just knowing that it doesn't incorporate Grant. More than bigger than anything is that this is a time of money and people are beginning to like dip their hands into it, even government officials in there. So it's a mixed bag. And Grant administration represents Reconstruction. And he also represents by the time that he's does not run for a third term when he was thinking about it, you know, especially like all the, again, all the ones is the stalwarts are saying, hey, he's our traditional like Republican president. There's nothing wrong with him, but they want to get somebody else here. Rutherford B. Hayes, 1877, he comes into office, really pulls the troops out of the South. And there's a labor strike that's going on at that time. That's a little bit another motivation why he pulls them out. That's not the most important thing. Most important thing is the big picture about Grant does go through the scandals. And, this is a time of political machines. This is a time where you have Thomas Nast really taking a look at the corruption of Boss Tweed in here and seeing that like he's representative of the bad political machines in big cities in here of what some of the the grift, the graft, the cronyism, the nepotism that was going on here. And he actually favored Grant during this time, but this is one of the things that's going to be tried to be corrected during the progressive era. That's all they want to do. And it's what the populists would like to do too as well, but they were mostly concerned about more rural and country problems and everything, and financial problems more than it's like the urban problems and the urban politics in there. Tweed is the Democrat, like that. Democrats, Northern Democrats, they love the immigrants because they mean votes. Speaking of immigration here we go here. That's part of the Gilded Age. And I want to correct something I always think about, like, People do not like these kind of new immigrants. Like people don't, are very apprehensive about any like strangers coming into the neighborhood, strangers coming into the country, and it's very apprehensive about whether these ones that's a little bit more different looking, more different languages, different religions, from Orthodox Christianity to Judaism, more the Sicilians, like coming the Romanians, the Roma people. So that's really influxing. There's still a lot of people coming in from Western Europe as well. Can't discount that. Still a lot of Irish and Germans like really coming here. And they're worried about them assimilating. They're worried about things that you may hear of today, like, it's crime. What are we going to do about our services here? Corporations love them because they're a way that can, like, they can still kind of make profit and kind of exploit this kind of cheap labor. I do want to qualify that, even though we throw around that term cheap labor. It's one of those things in APUSH that we need to always correct is that, people don't think of themselves as cheap. They think their labor is very valuable and what they work. And working during this time, usually an average of 6 days a week, and really about 10 hours a week, and that may be the average there. Most of the time, you're kind of ending up at 6 or 7 and spending your whole day and afternoon at your job at some places in there that they don't see themselves as cheap. America is built for immigration. Other countries are not as built for immigration geographically and far as like industry and their economy wise. We've always been very fortunate that we had an influx of immigrants from the really beginning of the colonies of the 17th century to modern day. Notwithstanding what Native Americans would say about this, of course. But we've always, as a kind of like, looking back as our country, benefited from the immigrants. You have countries now who try to recruit immigrants. One of the reasons why immigrants come here, they want to build a better life. All right. And they see this as opportunities. If you're Levi Strauss, you're George, you think you can become an entrepreneur by like, getting into the clothing industry. All right. If you're Andrew Carnegie, hey, I came from a very, very like, a working class family. Very much a rags to riches story here, but I'm working for Tom Scott. I'm going to try to use my natural intelligence, work on that, and build myself up. America's built for this, okay? And we've taken advantage of this. You might have some problems with other countries, like with immigration, virtue of your geography, virtue of like what's your boundaries that like in your setup where you can't be as open with immigration, benefit from immigration like we've been so fortunate of. Even our school, the very much of our school here, benefits from all this immigration. That's the way it's been set up and it's the way it went through history. That's kind of the immigration realm. Yes, kind of reactions. Chinese Exclusion Act. You have that in 1882. You kind of that's a reactionary to that. You have the quota systems that we'll talk a little bit more about next year, and you see the nativist, resentment growing there. You don't have an official know nothing party, but you still have a lot of nativism, and you really have the rise of the Klan in the early 20th century with the book The Klansman and the birth of the nation and the white supremacist movement in the early 20th century. They're very much of an anti-immigrant movement, nativist movement in there. So that theme is going through at this time on here. What else is happening here? Like, in the Gilded Age, the debates in the Gilded Age. You have on one side people like Thorstein Veblen, and Edward Bellamy, Henry George, Progress and Poverty, Looking Backwards, all right, Conspicuous Consumption, versus, all right, people like Herbert Spencer, William Graham Sumner, who says the Gilded Age is best. Rockefeller and Vanderbilt, all those guys are captains of industry. Rest of the people are basically kind of scum, or they really are in a somewhat social caste system here, virtually, even though it's not official. That the reason why you're in your spot is because you're inferior stock. You do not have the good stuff made of what good, successful Americans are. And you have these other people again, looking at progress and probably talking about like, no, we got to look at the working man. Let's look about ourselves, working ourselves up. They've taken advantage of us. They actually have gotten rich off of our backs, in here. You had that debate. And one of those people who was talking about that was William Jennings Bryan. Right? He says that we don't need trickle down, we need trickle up. And he is going to be the Democratic candidate, all right, in the 1896 election. He rises in popularity from the growing populist movement, really where the Populist Party really forms in the early 1890s. 1892, they had the Omaha platform, and you're so much should be familiar with that because it's the progressive platform in a way, the progressive agenda, from direct election of senators to a graduated income tax in there, to that they want referendum, they want initiative, they want a secret ballot, they want all kind of election reform in here, so to make sure it's that's cleaned up. And they're both into temperance, all right, both into kind of like prohibition. The similarities between the differences between them, again, the populist rule, progressives more urban, and they're more concentrated at like you go about like middle class areas, and they want to do a lot of social engineering based upon education, based upon like what they've learned in college. Populists more came out of what we call like um, the Grange, the Greenback Labor Party, the Farmers Alliance in here, and with Tom Watson, all those guys, James Weaver and Mary Lease in here working on that for bimetallism because they were worried about the money supply and the gold standard. And we've been through this so many times. They were civil rights because they thought that was the way to go. And we end up with sometimes a couple of panics here. You got one in 1873. Usually about every 20 years, just kind of remember. And always the .com causes them, and there's some pretty bad results from each one. Railroads really collapsed in 1873. It's kind of like one of the main causes in there. 1893 is a very severe depression at this time here. Grover Cleveland is the president. He is to blame. This is why you get reactions like the Coxey Army March, that following year, in there to march on DC about all the problems. You get the Pullman strike in 1894. So things surrounded at the time. More politics in here. And again, you see how dense the Gilded Age is here. It's mostly Republican presidents and even a Democratic president, Grover Cleveland, that acts like a Republican. And what do they do? High tariffs, pro business. They try to pass some acts to kind of rein in these people from the Interstate Commerce Act, which forms the Interstate Commerce Commission in 1887. Then you have the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. Again, does not have the kind of not if you don't have a president, you don't have government really kind of like enforcing the laws. The president, that's what he does. Then it's really not going to rein in like what's going to happen with Teddy Roosevelt. They change over time. You hate all these kind of thinking skills. You don't even want to think about that, but you should recognize them when you use them. What stayed the same? All right. What changed in here? So, what stayed the same for African Americans as far as fighting for civil rights in the Reconstruction era and the Gilded Age to the Progressive era? A lot of times they suffered the lynchings, the Jim Crow laws, but some of the things that did change, you have a lot of rise of African American leaders, Ida Wells, Booker T. Washington, W.B. Du Bois, just to name just a few, working on that and form to protest against all the kind of discrimination, and particularly the lynching. NAACP forms in 1909, and they're really protesting against all the really want to recognize there should be some kind of anti-lynching, anti-discrimination in here. You have some small victories. Grandfather clause is unconstitutional. They are working on it, but really, race relations are pretty bad, and for African Americans during these times. But again, they're not, again, they're going to schools, they're getting the opportunities, and they're fighting back here. And they're, and two approaches to Booker T. Washington versus W.B. Du Bois, and I think you kind of familiar with that. So we get towards the end again. William McKinley kind of closes out the Gilded Age here with his election, him becoming president in 1897. Get the Spanish American War, because now we can kind of afford a war. I tell you about the arguments in imperial. You get the kind of the anti-imperialist league forming in the late 1890s. One of those arguments, it's against American ideals. We don't want inferior people into our country. We don't want to compete against cheaper labor. Uh, you know, we don't want to, like, again, those are reasons why we're against, like, Mark Twain, Andrew Carnegie, and Booker T. Washington were against the imperialism. But we do get the Spanish American War, results in everything, the territories from the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Guam, and then can becoming a protectorate of Cuba. Open door to China. Now we get to I'm going to spend like the last 5 minutes here just kind of recapitulating, like, progressive move. But as you notice, most of this already, you see? So really these last minutes here, you don't really, and I'm going to go back to it again, you don't have to worry as much and everything. It's like, well, wait a minute, did I spend my time on Americana and get the chapters down and get a good start on the first half of the test here? All right, because I already, by virtue of already that what you've learned, most of you, well, 99% of you, that you'll be, you're already prepared for about, like, about most of the questions, 15 of the questions on there. Progressive era here, okay, and again, Theodore Roosevelt. And as my friend Joseph would say, oh, Mr. Price, again, the three C's. Yeah, square deal. More the big theme is this. He is, again, I want to say here, he is trying to be the referee. He wants the executive branch of the government, all right, to kind of rein in Northern securities, the bad trust. Let's protect consumers. They read the jungle. They read exposés in McClure's magazine, Collier's magazines, from an Ida Tarbell, from a Lincoln Steffens, and then they do, like, again, read the novel The Jungle, and they want to protect the consumers. What are these bad medicines? What are this corruption in here, government? Let's do something about it. Don't forget Robert LaFayette in Wisconsin. Other people, I mean, besides other governors like Hiram Johnson in California, really the ones that say, hey, we need a graduated income tax so government can use these funds to save capitalism, because that's what progressive is about, save capitalism. All right. That's one thing. And rein in the bad trust. Right. Clean up, politics and government, clean up the political machines, attack them and how they work, make things more democratic, help out society, right? How we're going to help out society? Temperance. And actually, maybe finally get the women, their suffrage rights as well. Let's do something about child labor. Let's do something about sanitation into the streets. That's going to take some money. That's going to take city managing. That's going to take city planning. This is what the progress is all about. You need to know what were the, like, main objectives of the progressive movement and who they were before you dig into the Elkins Act, the Hepburn Act. Mr. Bryce, can you tell me what's the difference between the Elkins Act and the Mann Elkins Act? Stop. All right, the nonsense. Go back and says, let me go back and see if I know the objectives of this time period. Who are the presidents and what they're doing? All right, in each one. The debates between how Taft did not seem as, environmentally or conservationally, like, friendly as Theodore Roosevelt, maybe perceived as kind of weak on attacking, like, big business, and, not satisfied. Then you enter Woodrow Wilson, who really, with his new freedom, is going back to small business, but actually this is where you get all the progressive amendments, the 16, 17, 18, 19 kind of like ratified basically during his administration. Again, 16 is a little, kind of right before it goes in, but you need to know those amendments, and you need to know 13, 14, 15 as well. I'm only going to do 30 minutes, okay, like that. And that's the way it's going to be. So I got the countdown on here. I'm just kind of clicking on here. You guys know what you need to do. You don't need to, like, watch my fat face. You can just, like, listen to this, and hopefully it's Horton Hears a Who, and something will sink in. It's like, that Americana. Maybe I need to read that, and then maybe I need to go sleep and get some rest and just, like, not worry. hours. I got biology. I just did my English. My math exam is coming up. I need rest. My brain needs rest. Let me just do that. I'm proud of myself and I'm proud of what I've been doing. I say you guys, good luck, and you guys are going to do